Welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast, the podcast that is passing wisdom to the next generation of parents who are transforming athletes with leadership through sports. So, in our episode today, we are interviewing Coach DJ Maxwell. Coach DJ Maxwell is a special agent for the FBI. That's pretty cool. He also has his own podcast, Foxhole Podcast, and is also a JV basketball coach and an 8th grade travel ball basketball coach. And in our conversation today, we talk a lot about building culture and what that really takes, how to have a flexible mindset, how to host and have team bonding events that really set the foundation for a quality season and to build that trust. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Bridging Impact Podcast. Coach Maxwell, I am thrilled for our conversation today to talk and share about your many experiences in your day job and also, in the night job as a coach, and talking sports psychology, talking building culture, mental toughness, and all that. So welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be on the other end of a podcast and not necessarily having to lead it, right? Just get to participate. And I'm excited about the topics you've picked and just the other side conversations we've had about basketball in general. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So as we dive right in, the first question we ask all of our guests for the first question is, what is your definition of impactful leadership?
Yeah, that's I listened to some of your other podcasts, and I think that first, let me just say thank you for leading in this capacity, right? I think that's something that we don't hear enough about, leadership and what that really means. And we don't hear enough stories about how people ended up being leaders themselves and what it means to have impact. And for me, I think I've been a leader for longer than I cared to be. I found myself in high school and school growing up as being an oil can on a team, kind of being the guy that tried to get us over a hump or tried to get us past a challenge. And I'm not sure where that came from, but I just always found myself in that capacity. And same thing with the military. I always found myself in leadership roles. So I kind of felt like I learned on the fly, and I picked up a lot of bad habits from being a leader. And it wasn't until I really had, I was in a workplace after I got out of college, and I was responsible for a budget and responsible for people and responsible for a livelihood that I really started to decide I needed to be a student of leadership if I was going to be successful. And so for me, where that's come full circle for me is that, sorry, if you're hearing any of that, my apologies. I want to be an impactful leader, and where I came to that position for me became from this notion of servitude and serving others. I realized that leadership wasn't necessarily a position; it was more of an action, right? And to be a leader meant to be in servant of other people. And I just really wanted to be a leader that was able to give my own service and give my own back to a community. If it's we're talking about basketball, it may be youth leaders, but for employees, it was the same way, right? If I was able to hear what they needed and what they wanted, I could sort of provide that back to them. So for me, being an impactful leader is a lot about just serving and giving back to others.
Yeah, 1,000%. It is about giving and serving, especially in the coaching world, but also in the professional world outside of coaching, and understanding that leadership, there are a lot of leaders out there that are transactional leaders, right? Like, you do this for me, I'll do this for you. But almost what I'm hearing from you is like serving, giving, and transforming, which is all what the Bridging Impact Podcast is all about. And I'd love for you to share, and dive a little bit more into those experiences that you talked about. Like, you found yourself in some of those positions to get a team over a hump or an organization over a hump, and you have some of these responsibilities at, an age where maybe you have that imposter syndrome of, why me, right? And it's kind of like you're called on to take action around that. I'm curious, what experiences really helped shape some of your definitions of impactful leadership?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite stories of leadership lesson when I was maybe not being a good servant of those around me my first real job out of college, I found myself with about 50 employees, and I was managing a before and after school kind of sports program, youth program. And it was a fee based. So parents were, paying to send their kids to this program. And the staff that worked for me relied on us to have a viable program, because that's where our paychecks came from, obviously.
Right.
And there was the company had this policy that at 10 years with the company, employees got a cash bonus. I don't remember what it was. It was a couple $100. And my first iteration through this, and what happens in this company at the end of the year, they had a company party, and then the boss would hand out these checks to all the tenure folks. And there were a couple of people that were like 3 months short of their tenure, right? And when I think about this in hindsight, it's sort of silly, right? Like, they're 3 months away. I won't see them again for another end of the year party for a year. Just issue the check and pay the employee. That was kind of the culture of that company. But being the leader I was at that time, I was like, well, no, it's not quite. I haven't quite been here 10 years. It's like 9 years, 7 months. And so those employees were expecting a check. I don't know. I didn't really ever get like, this is the standard that we do if they're 3 months in or 2 months in. I just remember thinking as a young leader, well, it's a slippery slope. What if they're like 4 months from 10 years? What if they're 5 months? And when do you kind of draw the line when they get this bonus? So I didn't write anyone a bonus check. And the pain and suffering that came from a 3 month iteration of not just issuing that check for an entire year as a leader, it demoralized, I think, those employees. It hurt our relationship because they didn't feel like they were trusted. They definitely didn't feel like I was someone that they could work for, right? And almost immediately I recognized, hey, this was a miscalculation on my part as a leader. And as soon as I could, I called those employees in. I paid them. I gave them their bonus and said, "Hey, listen." And I think this has been a blessing for me, that I've always been okay with just saying, "Hey, I messed up. This is a mistake on my part." And I got them all in the office and said, "Hey, listen, this is on me. It was short-sighted on my part to not issue a bonus, and I should have done that." But I sort of corrected the course a little bit there. But it caused some damage to a relationship. And so from that point forward, with all those employees and everyone around them, everyone knew, right? Like, everyone was talking that the new boss is not a great leader. So there's no better way to learn leadership. You cut your teeth on something so dramatic as that. And from that point forward, I've always sort of looked at, whatever the framework of the organization I'm in, or of a team, you just have to look at it through not black and white lens, like, and look at it for each individual, right? Like, what is important to them, and what's it going to get me? What's it going to get the organization, and how do we get over a hump if we need to get over that? If we have these hard rules for every situation all the time, so you have to be flexible enough and have flexible enough mindset that you're okay making exceptions, and then you have to be able to defend those exceptions when they're there. But if you put the employee or the person or the athlete first, I think you start with those foundations. And so that really quickly gets to, I get asked this a lot from parents who are looking for teams, or when we're getting into kind of basketball here a little bit. And I just set up goals for myself. What are my cultural goals as a coach? What are my foundational beliefs as a coach? And I always start with this. The starting point for me is that at the end of the day, with whatever team I'm coaching, and right now it's boys, so I'll use that, young youth, I'm trying to grow young boys into young men. And we're doing that through competitive basketball. And so when there's a junction of conflict somewhere where someone new wants to come on team, or we're going to play in an upper division, or whatever happens to be that rolls into coach's laps, I have the ability to go back to those foundational beliefs and ask myself the question, what am I doing? Is this really growing young boys into young men? And if it's not, then I stay away from that, right? So if we go back to that first example of me being a young leader in a company, what was I trying to do there? I was trying to get the company to be successful financially, ultimately that's the goals of the company. And my own just belief that it wasn't quite 10 years didn't reach that. If I could have just said, like, listen, what could I do here for this particular employee to help advance the mission of this organization? Yeah, what's 3 months? Would have been no big deal, right? When you think about it that way. But, as young leaders, you tend to draw lines, and sometimes you have to kind of feel like you have to fluff your feathers a little bit and show where the
Right.
that we have standards and that. But I think it's just important that when you're looking at, you have a foundational belief that you're operating from, and that you constantly keep your ego in check. And I would say that's the next biggest thing for me is asking myself the question, is this being ego driven, or is this really a servant driven thought that I have, or a process, or a decision I'm making?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great question to ask, right? Because oftentimes we can get caught up in kind of almost what I'm hearing is like the short term sort of win, in terms of like, okay, right now for our company, we'll save. And I'm not saying that you're trying to save a little bit of money, but a lot of times we make short term decisions that may affect like long term outcomes instead of just being like, okay, you know what? Let's make sure that these employees who have pretty much been here for 10 years, make sure that they're staying on the mission, and we're going to be able to meet this for the long term. Because I think a lot of times, coaches, like I'm thinking about this right now, where I have, a couple of, my more talented kids are, for lack of a better term, slacking off, missing practice, and they're not going to play as much. But if I really wanted to win tomorrow's first game of the day, right, I would play them, right? But that's not best for the long-term development of the team or the long-term development of their individual, because that shows that they can do this behavior and then get away and play just as much as the others. And so I have to be able to, kind of draw that line in the sand, and kind of what you're talking about as a leader in developing, boys to men. And part of becoming a man and just an adult in general is becoming responsible for your actions. And so I would love for you to share more about, the culture and how you build, and teach young boys how to be men, especially for me as someone who's, trying to build and instill leadership into my athletes as well.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm glad you asked it, because it is something that's really important to me. And I didn't start doing this with basketball players. I certainly did it in organizations for when I was leading bigger organizations. I did it this way. So I just had ironically enough, another culture building, call it a party. It's a 5-hour process. That I've sent all of my teams through, and we just did one this weekend, Saturday. So what I typically do with when I'm trying to build a culture, and this team is a JV. This is a JV team. They are relatively new to each other, so they haven't been playing together for a long time. There's some kids have and some haven't. So we started with just competitions at my house. I held a party at my house, and we had some cornhole, and I had some axe throwing going on, and I'm on 6 acres. So we got kids out in wilderness. Nice. It was cold outside. I said, be prepared. We're going to be outside the whole time. And we were just competing against one another, 2 teams. And what I did was, at the end of that competition, I made the victor got to be cheered on, and the losers got to do the cheering. And I made them cheer for a minute. Like, that was the thing. All right. If you lost, the consequence of being a loser is you have to cheer for 1 minute solid for your opponent. That's a difficult thing to do, right? Just kind of clap and cheer. And so we talk about,
for a kid,
especially for kids, right? Especially, right? You're feeling comfortable on both sides. So, but that leads to this conversation of, how did it feel when you were being cheered on? It felt good initially. How did it feel? Did you feel like at some point someone wasn't really cheering for the right reasons? They were just going through the motions of cheering. So I want to set the stage for my teams about lighting people up, right, when they're on the court or they're playing. It's important. So that's why we ask a question like, how did you feel when you first started cheering for you? And then how do you feel when someone's just sort of clapping because someone told them to clap? You're really not, lighting your teammate up for the right reason. So that's kind of the stage setter for the rest of the culture setting day. And here, in rough terms, what we do, I ask the question, I break them up into smaller groups, ask the question, where in society are you when you represent the team? Like when we're at games, I'm going to represent this team. When we're at school, we represent this team. When we're hanging out with our family, we represent this team. When we're at lunch or dinner after a game, we go collectively, we're representing our team. And then the next question is, who are you representing? When you're with your team, who is it that you represent? And, you know, like we represent our coach. We represent the team itself. Sometimes we represent our school. We represent our parents and our families. We represent, you know, those sorts of things. And this takes some time. That you ask them to write them down. You come together, you have some discussion. It's important to kind of hear what it is they're saying and then guide them to a place where their answers are, you know, are something that you can collect and put into a bigger team culture. And then the last sort of phase of that component is, what are the behaviors that we're going to have at those locations, the places where we said we're representing ourselves and our team and our family? What are the behaviors we're going to have there? So one of them, simple one, might be like if we're at a gym and we're working out, or after a game, we're going to make sure we leave no trace. When we leave there, we're going to pick up our stuff and we're going to clean up after ourselves. If we're in a game, one of the standards we're going to have is, hey, we're going to be respectful to the opponent and the referee. So what does that look like? Question I would ask them. What does it look like? Well, you know, I might tell the ref it's a good call. Okay, maybe I don't want to do that one, but I might, before the game starts, I can go make eye contact with that ref, introduce myself, tell him I appreciate him being there, because we know that it's hard to get refs. A lot of people aren't reffing. It's a dying art. So we start doing those sorts of things. What is the behavior going to have at school? Well, I need to have 100% effort, right? If my grades aren't set, I can't play. If I don't get the have to do's done, I can't do the want to do's of playing basketball. So we go through and make a list of all of the things, the behaviors that are important. And then those behaviors become their cultural standards, like their values. Here's our values. Our values are 100% effort at school, at home, with our families. Our values are being respectful of our teachers, respectful of our opponents, whatever it happens to be. Whatever components of those values are, you can put those in. I try to distill them down into 10 things. This group was 12. They had some good things in there because they had the first time I ever had a social media component, right? How do we behave on social media? Because who are we representing? What are our values and standards there? And then the very last component of that. So I'm writing this stuff down. The very last component of that is I asked them to come up with some phrases that they would use to remind themselves about those values. Like in a game, I think one of the values was, hey, we always have a good positive attitude. So if you throw up a 3-pointer and it's an air ball, and the entire, you know, stands chants air ball to you, like what's the right behavior, right? The right behavior is like, next one, I got the next one. I'm going to miss shots. We understand that. So then the reminder is the phrase next one. So everyone agrees. If I'm on the bench or if it's me, it makes an air ball. Hey, we're just going to say, hey, next one. And we all know what that means. We're going to remind ourselves before practice begins. Hey, because one of the standards is we want to have energy at all of our practices. Hey, while we're warming up, hey, bring the energy. It's the phrases that they have. And again, another 10 to 12 phrases that they can use. And so what I do is I write the stuff down on the 2023 cultural values and standards for them. Here are the standards that you chose, and here are the reminders that you chose. Here's what they are. And then we talk about those every single practice. I start a practice with what we call a WABA. What are we better at? What are we better at? WABA statement. And I just say at the beginning of practice, here's my goals for the practice today. We're going to be better at pass and cut. We're going to be better at whatever thing we're working on. And then we go over one or two of those phrases that they came up with, so that throughout the practice, they can start practicing those phrases and utilizing them there. I also pick rotating team captains every week. And so when we're slipping on those values and standards, I'm not as a coach, being the preacher. I'll talk to the team captains and say, hey, these are the things and values that you said were important to the team. So make sure you guys are living up to these. It's kind of quiet in the gym today. It's not noisy or loud. Championship gyms are loud gyms. So it's not me telling the team constantly, hey, get up. It's them learning to be leaders themselves and bringing their teammates up for that. I think the last thing I do with culture, when we're setting this all up at the beginning of the year, and this happens in this sort of team culture party that I put together as well. I ask every athlete to tell me what are two things they want from a coach. Not necessarily from me, because I just want them to think about the best coach that you could possibly have, what are the two things you want from that coach? And they're usually the same types of things, right? To push me, to get me to the next level. But you hear other things like, hey, to just be present, to be empathetic to my situation, because kids have unique situations, right? They all come from different backgrounds and different family situations. I can usually distill those down into 5 or 10 things. And they write them on a card. I take them, I collect them. I put those in the team cultural statement as well. And that's my commitment to the team. So they have these things that they're committing to. And then at the bottom of that, here's my commitment to you. All the things that you asked to get from a coach, I'm going to commit to doing those for you. So it's not like just the team this is our culture. Like, this is the coach's values too. And this is what I'm going to give to you. And I let them know, listen, if you're struggling with an offensive scheme, a defensive scheme, with special teams, I will meet you at 2:00 in the morning. I will talk on Zoom with you. I'll be there before practice. I'll be there after practice. I just want them to know that I will go to any length and meet them at any time to help them be successful. And I think that gets lost with some coaches, right? And it's challenging when you're a coach. You show up to a practice, you've got an hour and a half to 2 hours, you're trying to cover a lot of distance in that span of time. Some coaches are sharing courts with other coaches, and you don't get to have relationships with players, probably in the way that you want to, because it's one scheme after another scheme, or one plan after another plan. It's hard to kind of connect with them. So I at least let them know, if you want to connect with me, here's these other ways to connect. And so I think the last component I add to that cultural piece is you have to be doing stuff outside of basketball, outside of practice. Go to the roller skating ring, go to an axe throwing place, get some place where you can actually talk to these kids and ask them what they want to do when they grow up. You'll be surprised what you hear from engineers to just any, this last group was anything involving basketball. They just love the sport, right? They just want to do something.
Yeah.
So I, in broad terms, that's kind of what I do. And then, I just try to make a relentless commitment to upholding those standards and values. And they're not mine, they're theirs. So I help them remind themselves that they're theirs.
Yeah, exactly. That's the coach's job, right? To hold that standard, and you have to fight for that standard too, because they're kids. They're especially teenage boys, right? They could be on their best behavior one day, and then the next day it's like something happened at school, and you're fighting for those standards. And I think one of the actually questions I have that I'm having a challenge with currently is just like getting everyone to buy in, right? I think I have 90% buy-in, but I have one player in particular who has been challenging. And then he rubs off on another player who's important to our team. And, I've been having one-on-one conversations. I've been asking him different questions. How can I help you? Where do you want to go? But, I'm making little bits of progress, right? Like I know it's not a quick, pill fix, right? But I'm just curious, through your experiences in building teams and building culture, I'm sure you've had, players push back on culture building or something in the past. And I'm just curious how you navigate that.
Yeah, it's a really hard question. It's a challenging situation, really, is probably the better way to say that, because you're going to you'll always have that sort of 80-20 rule. Like, 80% of your players are going to knock it out of the park, and maybe in competitive sports, less so will be challenging, but 80% of your time will go to those 20% or 10% of the people. Right. And you don't want to do that, because it's not fair to the other athletes. And quite frankly, you're taking time away from the kids who want to learn and grow that aren't there. I'll share a couple of experiences with you of kind of how I've dealt with that in the past. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. I wish I had like a magic pill. Right? Yeah. But it's one of the reasons I started doing this cultural, setting thing where the athletes are kind of coming up with their own values, their own culture. And it's no surprise to me that the last couple times I've done it, I've had probably 80% of the players show up, right? Like there's always a reason why kids don't show up. And the ones that don't show up, or sometimes it's just the kids that join the team after that's been set. Mm-hmm. They don't have the same buy-in because they weren't part of the process. Let me just go back a second, because there's something else we do I end the team culture party with around a bonfire almost every time I've done it. And I ask the athletes to write something on a card, because this is going to get to your question. I asked them to write on a note card that one or two things that they've been doing that are impeding their success. You know, what are one or two things you've been doing that you want to stop doing this year that are impeding your success? They write those on a note card, and then I ask them to share if they want to share. You know, it turns out one person will share, and then it's like a cascading effect. Everyone else will share. And when they're done reading what that is from that note card, I have them ball it up and then throw it in the fire. And so they burn that thing, right? We just have everyone stand up and say, "Welcome to the new team," right? So they get high-fived and lighted up, and when they say, "They're going to put this behind them now." And it's this constant reminder that the past is a place of reference, not a place of residence. So those things that you were doing that you want to put behind you, it's a place you can refer to say that's the old me, but it's not who I am now. It's not where I'm going to reside. And so I think having those things all in place, and then it just sets the stage for the challenge of that one or two player, because it's not you as the coach that's always trying to address that behavior. It's the team, right? The team, it's their team, and they have a buy-in in it. And it's part of the rules of our team. You know, if I blow the whistle, everyone gathers around, and we just say lock on, right? Like, don't shoot the ball, don't be spinning the ball, don't dribble the ball when a coach is trying to talk. But we tell players to coach each other in that capacity. So when someone new arrives, we give permission to shush somebody if they're talking. Just shh. Just give them a shush. Maybe just tap them on the shoulder. Hey, and you're being a little bit annoying with the ball. So I try to step out of me doing that and put that back on the players to lead their own team. But now let's get to the more difficult part of that. Like, you've done all of these things and all these things are happening. You still have this person. There used to be a time when Gabe would just make everybody run, right? And it would be like discipline for everyone. We're a team and we're a unit. But I think, again, that gets to this fairness of what happens to the kids who are executing all the time. They're always on. And you're taking away from your practice too. And I've done it where I've just kind of been in the ear, kind of drill sergeant-y with these kids. Right. Not successful either. So I think the thing that's worked best for me, and it doesn't work all the time, but it works most of the time, is, you know, if I have something challenging that's happening, maybe it's not about buying into the culture, but maybe there's, I don't know, we're doing something and they're going slow, or they're just not putting in the effort, or they're goofing off. Like we have a green light drill that we use with our team. And there was a player recently that was trying to knock the balls, you know, of his teammate out. So he didn't, you know, that's something that kids do because they're having fun, but you're trying to qualify for this green light test. So you get permission to shoot in games. Right. You know, you make that correction one time, don't do any, he still does it. So what I've been doing is like, listen, I'll just have a quick conversation, call him over. Hey, not quite with the standards of what we're doing here. Do you understand? Like, why do you think I'm talking to you? I let them just articulate what it is. So they kind of make the connection. Why is coach talking to me? Usually they know, right? They'll say it right away. Oh, because I was, you know, doing this. Like, right. So I just can't allow that to happen on this team because it's a slippery slope. So I'm just going to ask you to sit down, sit on the bench. And when you're ready to come back in, you're ready to kind of meet these standards, just let me know. We'll put you right back in. It's like a minute and they come back in and they'll come and say, Coach, I'm ready. So that seems to work for me. And it takes me out of the nagger. It takes me out of the grumpy old curmudgeon-y coach. Yeah. It takes me out of the disciplinarian all the time, like that way. And it takes me out of spending my time on that behavior. And where I can refocus my time on being an airborne receiver, or holding your shot longer, or getting the eye focused on the rim for a longer duration of time. It puts me in that coaching capacity and less of a disciplinarian. And ultimately, I think the kids, again, I have less of these problems since I've been doing kind of the culture setting things and letting teammates lead themselves and lead their own team. It's been better. But you're going to have those challenges. And that's just one that's worked for me. I wish I could tell you I've done that forever, but I haven't. But I will say that you have to be relentless with holding those standards, because it's a slippery slope. And if you're not fair, you let someone slip and not someone else, it will go noticed and it will become a problem.
Right. No, that makes a ton of sense. And you have to be consistent about it, right? Like you can't do it one day and then the next day. But I like that way of navigating challenges because, like you talk about when you're the disciplinarian and you're like, okay, I'm going to punish you, the whole team, right? Then you're taking, again, you're taking time from the drill. And there's only, 90 minutes for practice or an hour for practice. It depends on, the school or where you're at. But, you know, time is limited, and for me, like, I'm trying to get all of our guys on the same page for our offensive scheme and defensive scheme. We haven't played much together, so every single minute counts. And if we're running because of a certain behavior, right, that's taking time from everyone, and it's ending up hurting the whole team instead of just navigating and navigate or dealing with that certain situation. So it's really all about creating player-led teams is what I hear.
100%. It's their team. I remind them that all the time. This is your team. I'm here as a guide to help you with, your team skill. I'm not even helping you very little with individual skills when we're in the season, right? That's something you do off season, and you bring that back to the team.
Right. No, that makes a ton of sense. And I'm curious, we talked a little bit before about, building mental toughness, right? Like, obviously we're talking about culture building, but, at some point we're going to hit our midway point of the seasons and that whatever our records are, honestly, a lot of times I feel like when you have a great record, you start to slip a little bit. So I'm curious, how you build and implement mental toughness into your athletes throughout the season.
Yeah, this is something I'm super passionate about, and I think I've spent at least the last 30 years in sports psychology and mental toughness and trying to coach and train that. And it's when I was thinking about this the other day, a lot of the stuff that I was doing 20 years ago, it's still applicable today, and I still do it today. It's just with a slightly different athlete, right? I think the times are a little bit different, and the approach is a little bit different. But I think one of the biggest things for young athletes is highlighting to them that they have a choice, right? I think mental toughness it starts with this idea of choice. I was just talking to, I was working with a varsity team a couple weeks ago, and I like to start these kind of sports psychology, mental toughness conversations with what does it take to be a successful basketball player? And invariably you get, like, I put them in categories like mental skills and physical skills. And, they'll say, I need to be a good ball handler. I need to have good hops. I need to be a good shooter. I need all of these things, right? Those physical skills. And every once in a while someone will say, you got to be motivated. You got to be disciplined. Okay. Put those in the mental category. So we look at what does it take to be a good shooter? Well, I got to practice. Okay, what does it take to practice? Well, I got to get off the couch. I got to put down the game controller. I've got to go outside. Okay, is that a mental skill or a physical skill? So, they start to see that actually is a mental skill. So these physical skills are founded from these mental skills. And then you kind of can get to this place like, well, how much of your time are you spending? If you're telling me 80% of what it takes to be a successful basketball player involves to some degree mental skills, we'll call it mental toughness for lack of maybe a better definition right now. But if you're telling me 80% is that, and how much of your time are you spending training mental skills? It'll be like none, right? Maybe it's a little bit. And I'm not advocating spending 80% of your day mental skills training and 20% of your day physical practice. But I am saying that you can spend some time being a little more intentional with those mental skills. And one of those things starts with this idea of choice, that you have a choice to get up and go outside. You have a choice to shoot. You have a choice to put in extra time. And that revolves around this notion of volition, like the will to choose. And I think a lot of young athletes just go through their lives not understanding that there's these things that are before them every day. I call it the good wolf and the bad wolf on their shoulder, right? The bad wolf saying, hey, just stay on the video game, one more game, right? And the good wolf saying, hey, you probably should get out there. Coach has a goal of shooting 500 shots this week, and we need to get outside and we need to do the workout. And I want to highlight to the athletes that there's these voices in their head, that there's this self-dialogue that's happening. And I use this in this good wolf, bad wolf. It's a kind of an old parable. And which one of these wolves wins? Well, the wolf you feed is the one that's going to be more successful, right? The wolf you feed is the one that's going to win. So if you constantly feed the bad wolf and stay on that video game, you feed the bad wolf and say, I'll do it tomorrow. that's the neural network that you create. Like that's the muscle memory that gets forged. But if you're challenging yourself to go outside when it's cold, when it's hot, when you don't want to do it, that's the fortitude that you begin to build there. So it starts with one knowing that there's these things happening, these dialogues happening internally. 2, that you have a choice, and 3, that there's volition, there's a will to choose, and just choose one. So I like to talk about being 1% better. Just be 1% better every day. And if you look at like what it takes to be 1% better, 1% of like all the time in the day is like 14 minutes. So can you do 14 minutes of something? Just do 14 minutes. Just start with that, right? That's the beginning of, and ultimately that's the beginning of discipline. And discipline is the beginning of freedom. Like if you're disciplined, you have all kinds of freedoms, right? Because you definitely have confidence, because if you're spending time, the biggest mediator of confidence is competence, right? So if you're one of these, if you're an athlete and you're saying, I'm just not really, I get this a lot from parents and athletes. I'm just not confident in what I'm doing here. And usually that confidence is a component of not being competent in the thing that they're doing. So someone who's shooting 1,000 shots a week, and they shoot a 3-pointer, and they're let's say at 3-point land, they track their shots. They're shooting 30% from 3. I would take that athlete any day. 30% shooter at 3-point, sure, 100%. And you throw up a 3-pointer and miss it. If you shoot 1,000 shots, a week, every week or a couple times a week, you pretty much know that what's an anomaly and what's not an anomaly. Like, oh, I shot that was an air ball. That's weird. That doesn't happen. I'm going to shoot again the next time. But if you don't shoot that often and you put one up, you're like, well, I better not do that again. It might be another air ball. You don't have a reference point to go on, right? Someone throws a trap on you and you're the guard. If you've been practicing your handles every day and you have a trainer and you spend just, a couple hours a week working on those handles, you see a trap coming. That's like dinner time, because someone's going to be aggressive on a trap. I can exploit that with my handles. I know how to do that. But if you don't have that competence, your confidence is going to be low. And so when the coach looks across the bench and says, who wants to go in? And they're pressing, and I'm not competent with my handles. I don't have confidence to go in there. And that's happened to players. I'm sure it's happened to you, right? Like, I need someone to go into play. So not me. People are looking the other way. I don't want to go in. That's like a battle happening in there. So that beginning of fortitude is just understanding that there's choice and that there's these dialogues happening, right? And then we can kind of get into these other components of the sort of more advanced skills, like something I'm working on with the varsity is just understanding the difference between response and reaction. That, a reaction is something that you're just responding to, if you will. A reaction is just something that's happening when you don't have preparation for it, whereas a response is planned. You've already experienced it somewhere. So a good example of that is, you've probably done this with your teams. You set up scenarios, game-like scenarios in your practice. It's the end of game. There's like, we're down, a couple points. We got 30 seconds left to put up a shot, and you're gaming out end of game situations. You're gaming out, how we're gonna respond and react, and you practice that. So when it comes time to do it, you have a planned response. And we do that to some degree in that way, but it's kind of weird that we don't always think how we're going to respond when someone gets hurt on our team. Like what's the plan when we have an injury? What's the plan when I was talking to a girls varsity coach last month, and she was telling me about the championship game the year before. She was playing in like the state championship game, and on the way to there was like a 4-hour bus ride to get there. On the way there, they were supposed to meet another bus that had food. Like the two buses didn't meet, right? Like there was some issue with the food delivery, and it screwed up everything. So they didn't get the warm up that they wanted. They didn't get time on that. So they had this whole plan. We're going to spend all this time. We're going to walk through the campus. We're going to walk through the course out of college, right? So it was like this big deal. And all of a sudden, someone threw a wrench in that. And she just said, we lost the game, right? I wasn't prepared. We weren't prepared. We didn't have the whole thing. So if you're not planning, like, how are we going to respond when something like this happens? Like, it's almost like baked into what I do daily now. Like, something's going good, I'm just like, you know what? some ball's going to drop. What's it going to be? So I'm starting trying to prepare myself for what's the thing. But in sport, we know what those are. We know that's going to be an injury. We know it's going to be a bad call at the end of a game. We know it's going to be. So how do you respond to those? And I think it's important to have those conversations as a team. Like, what happens if this happens? What's going to happen if this happens? What's going to happen if we get to the gym, something happens, and we only have a 5-minute warm up? Like, so what are the keys to success there, right? Okay, we still know the game plan. We still know what we're going to do. As long as we got warmed up, we're still our same team, right? We can say things like, good, we get to be successful in spite of all of these challenges. Like, right. Instead of the fear of, well, if I didn't get this didn't happen. It's not, I don't get to be successful. If I didn't get my warm up, I don't, I'm going to miss out on whatever. You can do it in spite of. And that notion of in spite of is important, that you can overcome an obstacle. And it's not like someone throws a roadblock up. Good. Here's my chance to overcome something new. Instead of the opposite is like, oh my gosh, there's this roadblock and I have to get around it. We're going to be late. Like, good. I get to show everyone that we won this championship game with 5 minutes warm up. That's how good we are.
Yeah.
That's the mindset. That's the mindset switch. But it's hard to learn it on the fly. It's something you have to practice.
Right. It takes intentional action. It goes back to what you were talking about at the very beginning of talking about that flexible mindset. And that's something that I've already learned really quickly is I have kids who have to take the bus at certain times. So I had to shift practices. We have to share the gyms, right? So when we only have a quarter of a court, okay, we're just working on our half court sets. Okay. And so it is all about just being flexible and utilizing that choice. Like you were talking about at the very beginning, when it's like, okay, do I want to, as a coach, do I want to listen to this podcast, or do I just want to listen to, some sports talk? Like, how am I intentionally going to be getting better? And maybe there obviously is time to, just listen to sports talk, right? But the truth is that we have to, always want to be getting at least 14. If we want our players to be, practicing 14 minutes a day, as coaches, we have to be listening and having conversations like these for 14% of our day, 14 minutes a day, to, constantly, improve ourselves, because that's how we're going to keep taking steps forward. And as we, kind of wrap up this conversation, when the 2-minute drill, here in our podcast, what are some of like the last piece of advice you have for, young coaches and young leaders that you've learned and just want to pass on?
Yeah, here's the biggest thing for me. And I talk about this a lot with parents and new athletes that come in. It's getting over this idea of winning. And I want to define like how I do this a little bit better, because I think this hurts a lot of athletes over the course of their years. It hurts parents. It causes players to leave teams and go to other teams, probably not wisely. And here's what it is. But I start everything with success, right? Like, that's our goal, is to be successful. And nowhere in that goal is winning, right? You might have a goal, depending on your level, of getting to a championship or whatever, winning that championship. But you can't control that. And so it starts for us with success. And we define success as preparation, will, your ability, your effort, and execution. But so I just kind of distill that down to a couple things: execution, preparation, execution, and effort, right? Those three things. And that's kind of what I press on to athletes. To be successful, that's what success looks like. So if you prepare for a game, you've done all the things you need to do. You've come to all the practices. You did all the workouts you needed to do. And you showed up to the game. You executed your game plan, your scheme, whatever it was, and you gave 100% effort. If you can look up, you've done that to 100%, and you look up at the scoreboard and it's not in your favor, I'm going to tell you probably didn't lose much. You probably gained something. There was a team that was better than you that day that beat you. That's just how that goes. And you don't know who's going to show up. Like, I've played, we've shown up at games where we score like 3 points because they're playing kids that are, 2 grades older than us. Right. The next week we're playing a championship game. It's just kind of the nature of AAU. But if you take that same example and you flip it on its head and you say, listen, we just played a team, we beat them by 30 points, but we were kind of lazy. We didn't execute. We didn't, we weren't given 100% effort. We didn't prepare. And you look up in this, you win the game. What have you really won? Is that a success? Right. It's not a success. And what are you really winning? And that kind of happens in AAU too, because they'll stack teams and teams just come in, they don't execute. they're sloppy basketball, but they've got a couple athletes and they win. And eventually what happens is those athletes meet up against other athletes who are just as skilled as they are, but have execution, effort, they put in time, and they're running a scheme. And that's when it's that sophomore, junior year of high school. And that's when kids realize, like, oh, I've been in the wrong program. Yeah, we've won a lot of games and tournaments, but we've missed out on foundational skills here. So if that's the biggest thing for me, is if you can kind of focus on the success and get rid of the winning in your head, that's the end all be all, that winning is a result of success. If you're successful, the wins will come for you. And that's just it's important, I think, a lost art in sport, and the winning just drives a lot of kids to different teams when they probably don't need to be. So that's the biggest thing for me. I don't know if there's anything else. I think the last thing would be for young athletes. I'll say this, that might be listening. Your current habits are perfectly positioned to give you your current performance. So whatever you're doing, that's what your performance is going to be. So if you're on the video games all day long, or you're doing something else all day long, don't be surprised at the outcome of your performance, right? So your habits drive your performance. Your current habits drive your current performance. So making that connection for them, that it's not magic when you show up on the weekend. It starts with discipline and those habits, and that's where you have the freedom.
No, 1,000%. I mean, it's the same thing for coaches, same thing for athletes, and that preparation, and preparing with consistent habits is what prepares you to, put yourself in successful opportunities to have those winning outcomes. But again, who you play matters so much, especially, in AAU world, high school world, doesn't matter, right? We have to continue to get 1% better each day. So where can people find you, on social media? Where can people find your podcast if they want to learn more and listen to you more?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I'll make sure you get my link tree, but I'm definitely on TikTok's probably where I post most content. I think it's Coach DJ Maxwell on there. The Foxhole podcast, it's a picture of a fox holding a machine gun. I cover a lot of like wellness stuff there, mental toughness stuff there. There's some veteran content, but I also interview quite a few basketball pros and other folks. Same place on Facebook, Twitter. They're all connected there. So you find one of them, you'll find my link tree on pretty much all of them. But you can also, from any of those, you have any questions, you can also ping me at any time. I've got a couple teams that have reached out here in the recent past that I'm working with on Zoom on mental toughness skills. So if you're a coach out there and you want some more information on that, or would like help doing that, I'm just all about serving right now, right? I'm volunteering my time to help people grow in that capacity, in that space. So please look me up if you're interested.
Well, we appreciate your time today and bridging your impact and your experience and wisdom with our audience and volunteering your time today. So thank you so much today, Coach Maxwell, and we will stay tuned.
All right, thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. We'd love it if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself, so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.